The shot echoed down 125th Street like a thunderclap ripped straight out of Judgment Day. One gunshot, clean, final. For half a second, Harlem froze. Men who had lived their entire lives under the sound of sirens, arguments, and back-alley violence stood motionless. Not because they hadn't heard gunfire before, but because they knew who that shot belonged to. It wasn't wild, it wasn't desperate, it wasn't chaos, it was a message. The body hit the pavement near the curb, hat rolling once before stopping face down in a shallow puddle of streetlight. Steam rose from the man's chest as if the city itself was exhaling. Across the street, a bakery owner froze mid-step. Upstairs windows cracked open an inch. Somewhere, a woman whispered a prayer. And then, silence. The shooter didn't run. He stood there, coat buttoned, shoulders square, revolver still low at his side. His face showed no panic, no rage, just resolve. The kind that told anyone watching that this had been decided long before tonight. Within minutes, word raced through Harlem faster than police radios ever could. 1 second, one shot. Power just changed hands. Because the man lying dead on that sidewalk hadn't been small. He hadn't been reckless muscle or an over-eager lieutenant. He was a connector, Italian-backed, city-protected, arrogant enough to believe Harlem would always bow when outsiders snapped their fingers. He was wrong, and the man holding the gun, he wasn't trying to be famous. He was correcting an imbalance. By dawn, every precinct captain, mob courier, numbers runner, and church elder would be asking the same question. Who gave the order? The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. No one did. Years earlier, Harlem had learned to read power the way farmers read the sky. In the late 1930s and early 40s, power didn't live in City Hall alone. It lived in back rooms, barbershops, numbers banks, and churches. It lived in favors owed and grudges remembered. And above all, it lived in men who understood restraint. The legend understood restraint. He wasn't loud, he didn't posture, he didn't waste words. His reputation didn't come from speeches or cruelty, it came from consistency, from keeping his word when others didn't, from knowing when not to pull a trigger. Harlem was his responsibility, whether the city recognized it or not. He walked those streets like a steward, not a king. He knew which shopkeepers needed protection and which didn't, which cops could be reasoned with and which ones couldn't. He knew when to pay and when to push back. And because of that, Harlem ran smoother under his shadow than it ever had under official authority. The numbers game fed families. The clubs paid rent. The violence, when it came, was measured. That balance made powerful enemies. Downtown didn't like that Harlem had its own order. The Italians didn't like that a black man controlled territory without permission. And certain police captains didn't like that crime existed without their cut. But none of them moved openly. Not until Vincent "Red" Falcone. Falcone wasn't a boss, he was worse. He was a middleman with ambition and protection. An Italian runner who thought Harlem was soft ground. He dressed sharp, smiled too wide, and spoke like a man who believed the city had already chosen his side. Falcone didn't ask to operate in Harlem, He announced it. At first, it was subtle. A new card game here, a new liquor route there, a few men shaking down shop owners who had already paid their dues. The legend noticed immediately, but he didn't react. That was his first lesson to enemies. Attention does not mean action. The second lesson came when Falcone sent word, not a request, but a demand. 50% of Harlem's numbers take. Protection fees to be rerouted. Out of respect, the message said, for order. The legend read the note once, folded it neatly, and burned it. No reply. That silence enraged Falcone more than any insult could have. So Falcone escalated. He went to the police. Not openly, never openly. He leaned on a captain who already resented Harlem's independence. He whispered about unchecked crime, about guns, about disorder. And suddenly, raids increased. Numbers banks were hit. Trusted men were arrested on flimsy charges. Storefronts were closed, pending investigation. The message was clear: bow or bleed. The legend still didn't move. He waited, because in Harlem, timing was everything. And violence used too early wasn't strength, it was weakness. Then Falcone made his fatal mistake. He didn't attack the legend directly. He humiliated the community. One night, Falcone's men drag a respected numbers collector into the street, an old man known for paying hospital bills and keeping kids out of trouble. They beat him slow, public, left him bleeding beneath a street lamp like a warning sign. That wasn't business. That was disrespect. By morning, Harlem was no longer asking if something would happen. They were asking how bad it would be. The legend visited the old man that afternoon, said nothing, left money on the table, walked out without a word. By nightfall, he put on his coat. By midnight, Falcone was dead on 125th Street. 1 second, one shot, and every power broker in New York felt the tremor. Because the rules had been violated, and the response had been final. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. By sunrise, Harlem was holding its breath. Police chalk circled Falcone's body like a question no one downtown wanted to answer. Uniforms stood stiff on the corners, pretending not to know what every cab driver already understood. The patrolmen didn't talk. They listened. Harlem had a way of speaking without opening its mouth. Inside the 28th precinct, the air was thick with anger and embarrassment. Captain Walter Grady slammed a file onto his desk hard enough to rattle the window glass. Grady was a career man, Irish, square-jawed, and deeply offended by the idea that any neighborhood in New York could operate beyond his reach. "They shot him in the open," Grady barked, "right under our noses." A lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, nobody saw anything." Grady laughed without humor. "They always see. They just don't talk." He knew who the shot belonged to. Everyone did. But knowing and proving were two very different things in Harlem, and that fact gnawed at him. Falcone's death wasn't just a homicide, it was a statement of jurisdiction. The Italians understood that immediately. By noon, 3 black sedans idled outside a private dining room on Mulberry Street. Men who never raised their voices leaned over white tablecloths, faces tight with calculation. Falcone hadn't been loved, but he had been useful, and usefulness demanded response. He was sanctioned, one man said carefully. He was careless, another replied. And careless men die. Still, a line had been crossed. A white man with Italian backing had been executed publicly in Harlem without consequence, so far. That could not stand unanswered, but no one rushed, because the legend wasn't reckless muscle. He was structure, and structure demanded caution. Harlem reacted in its own way. Shops opened on time. Church bells rang. Numbers runners moved quietly. No celebrating, no panic. Just a subtle, shared understanding that something had been settled. Old men nodded to one another on stoops. Women pulled their coats tighter and walked with purpose. Children were kept close. Order had been restored, but now it needed to be defended. The legend spent the day moving quietly through the neighborhood. He visited 3 barbershops, spoke to 2 pastors, sat in the back of a luncheonette long enough to be seen, then left before anyone could approach him. Visibility without vulnerability. That evening, he gathered his inner circle in a modest apartment overlooking Lenox Avenue. No lavish headquarters, no bodyguards lining the walls, just men who had proven, over time, that they understood discipline. "You all know why we're here," he said. No one interrupted. "They're going to test us," he continued. "Not with noise, with pressure." One of the men shifted. "The cops already are," the legend nodded. "And the Italians won't come loud. Not yet." "So what's the move?" someone asked. He leaned back, eyes steady. "We don't move at all." That answer unsettled them more than any call to arms. "Let them make the next mistake," he said calmly. "They always do." Captain Grady made his move 2 days later. He called a meeting at the precinct, community leaders, business owners, clergy. A show of concern. Cameras invited, words carefully chosen. "We want to restore safety," Grady said, standing tall behind a podium. "We can't do that if criminals are allowed to act as judge and jury." Everyone knew who he meant. What Grady didn't expect was the silence. No denunciations, no cooperation, no fear. Just stillness. That night, raids increased again. Doors kicked in, men hauled out on charges that wouldn't stick. The pressure wasn't about arrests, it was about exhaustion. The Italians watched closely. 3 days after Falcone's death, a message arrived. Not a threat, an invitation. A sit-down. Neutral ground, downtown club, private room. The legend read the note once, then folded it and placed it in his pocket. He showed up alone. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old money. 4 men sat at the table, suits sharp, expressions unreadable. They didn't stand when he entered. He didn't expect them to. One of them spoke first. "You made things difficult." The legend met his eyes. "He made things impossible." A pause. "Falcone was protected," another man said. "You killed him anyway." "He violated Harlem," the legend replied. That protection ended the moment he forgot where he was standing. The air tightened. "You understand what this invites," the first man said. "I understand what it prevents." They studied him, not for weakness, but for certainty. Finally, one man exhaled. "This stays where it is, for now. But don't mistake restraint for forgiveness." The legend rose. "I never do." He walked out without shaking hands. Downtown, Captain Grady received his own message shortly after. No names, no signatures, just pressure. Suddenly, warrants stalled, raids slowed. Orders came down to de-escalate. Grady fumed, but he obeyed, because even he understood hierarchy. Back in Harlem, the legend stood at his window that night, watching the streetlights flicker on. The shot had corrected the present, but the future still needed shaping, because power never forgives, it only waits. And somewhere in that waiting, another challenge was already forming. Harlem did not explode after Falcone's death. It tightened. The streets grew quieter, not safer in the way city officials like to measure, but sharper, more alert. Men spoke in lower tones. Meetings happened earlier in the day. Eyes lingered longer on unfamiliar faces. The neighborhood understood something fundamental. When power shifts without chaos, it invites correction. And correction was coming. The legend sensed it before any report reached him. He felt it in the way messengers hesitated before speaking, in the way money stopped moving for half a day at a time, in the way police cars parked just a little longer on certain corners. Pressure was being applied evenly, professionally. This wasn't revenge, it was containment. Downtown interests didn't want blood in the streets, they wanted obedience. If Harlem could be made nervous enough, uncertain enough, someone would talk. Someone always did. Captain Grady leaned hard into that belief. He ordered audits on businesses with clean books. He summoned pastors for routine conversations. He reassigned patrolmen who had learned how to coexist with the neighborhood and replaced them with younger officers eager to prove themselves. "Keep it legal," he told them, "but keep it constant." The goal wasn't arrests, it was fatigue. The Italians played a longer game. A shipment disappeared from a Harlem-connected warehouse in the Bronx. No violence, no note, just absence. A week later, a club lost its liquor supplier, then a bank quietly froze a line of credit that had never been questioned before. Invisible hands tightening invisible screws. The legend gathered his people again, this time in twos and threes across the neighborhood, never all at once. He listened more than he spoke. "They're trying to make us blink," one man said. "They're trying to make someone desperate," said another. The legend nodded. "And desperation makes noise." He issued simple instructions. No retaliation, no displays, no shortcuts. "Anyone who panics," he said, "becomes their excuse." That restraint was harder than pulling a trigger. Young men wanted action. Old wounds whispered for settling. Pride demanded response. But the legend understood something most didn't. Power isn't proven by movement, it's proven by stillness. Then came the betrayal. It always did. A mid-level runner, quiet, reliable, invisible, missed 2 check-ins. On the 3rd day, he didn't show at all. By the 4th, his name surfaced in a police report. Protective custody. Captain Grady had his opening. Grady called the press again. No names, just implications. "We're making progress," he said. "People are realizing cooperation is safer than loyalty." Harlem heard the message loud and clear. Fear rippled, not wild, but focused. The legend reacted immediately, not with threats, with containment. He ordered the runner's family relocated before dawn, paid their rent in advance, made sure the children were in school under new names by the end of the week. Then he did something unexpected. He visited the precinct. The room went quiet the moment he walked in. No coat removed, no hat tipped. Just a steady walk to the desk. "I'm here to see Captain Grady," he said.
The desk sergeant hesitated.
"You got an appointment?" The legend smiled faintly. "He's expecting me." He was. Grady came out of his office moments later, eyes cold. "Let's talk," Grady said. They sat across from each other in a small interview room. No lawyers, no recorders. Grady leaned back. "You've lost someone?" The legend met his gaze. "You've gained a problem." Grady smirked. "People get tired of being scared." "So do neighborhoods," the legend replied. "That's when they stop cooperating altogether." Grady's smile faded. "You think you're in control," Grady said, "but all it takes is one more man deciding he wants a deal." The legend leaned forward, voice calm. "And all it takes is one more mistake from your side to turn Harlem into a place you can't manage anymore." Silence. "You don't threaten police officers," Grady said tightly. "I don't threaten," the legend answered. "I explain outcomes." They stood. Nothing resolved. Everything understood. That night, the runner in protective custody attempted suicide. He lived, but the message landed where it needed to. Deals had consequences. The Italians moved next. A respected Harlem business owner received a visit, polite, courteous, unmistakable. The offer was simple. Switch protection, keep operating. Refuse, and doors would close one by one. The man asked for time. He went straight to the legend. The legend didn't raise his voice. He didn't issue commands. He told him the truth. "They're testing where your loyalty ends," he said. "Not with force, with comfort." The man nodded slowly. "And if I refuse?" The legend met his eyes. "You'll struggle, but you'll stand." The man left without an answer. 2 days later, his shop remained open. Nothing happened. That silence spoke louder than any threat. By the end of the week, everyone understood what was happening. Two systems were pressing against each other: law, money, influence, each trying to force the other to blink. And at the center stood one man refusing to move.
But pressure always finds a crack.
And the next challenge would not come quietly. It would come face to face. The meeting didn't come by note or messenger. It came by presence. One rainy evening just after dusk, 3 unfamiliar cars rolled slow down Lenox Avenue and parked without urgency. No sirens, no shouting, just engines idling like animals that knew they had teeth. People noticed. They always did. By the time the legend stepped out of the brownstone he'd been visiting, the sidewalk had cleared in that careful Harlem way, windows still open, eyes still watching, but bodies respectfully gone. 4 men waited near the curb. 2 were Italian, 1 was city, 1 was neither. The one who mattered stepped forward. Frank DeLuca. Not a soldier, not a messenger, a man who spoke for men who didn't need to introduce themselves. "Walk with me," DeLuca said, gesturing down the block. The legend buttoned his coat and joined him. No guards, no weapons visible, just 2 men walking under streetlights that hummed like they were listening. "You've made things difficult for a lot of people," DeLuca said casually. The legend didn't look at him. "I fixed something that was broken." DeLuca smiled thinly. "That's a matter of perspective." They stopped near a shuttered storefront. "Here's the truth," DeLuca continued. "Downtown doesn't like uncertainty. Neither do we. Falcone created noise. You removed him. That part's appreciated." The legend turned now. "Then we're done." DeLuca shook his head. "No, because you did it without asking." The air tightened. "You don't ask permission in your own house," the legend replied. DeLuca studied him. "That house sits on land a lot of people think they own. That's their mistake." A long pause, then DeLuca said it. "Captain Grady is under pressure. So are we. Someone has to give." The legend didn't blink. "Then it won't be me." DeLuca's voice hardened. "This doesn't end well when men refuse to bend." "It ends clean," the legend said.
Or it ends loud.
"That choice isn't mine." The confrontation moved inside the club without invitation. A back room, dim light, one table. Captain Grady was already there. He stood when the legend entered, not out of respect, but calculation. "This is inappropriate," Grady said. "You don't get private meetings." DeLuca waved him off. "Sit down, Captain." Grady hesitated, then obeyed. That told the legend everything he needed to know. "This neighborhood is out of control," Grady snapped. "You think one public execution makes you untouchable?"
The legend took a seat.
"I think it makes boundaries clear." Grady leaned forward. "You embarrass the department." "No," the legend replied calmly. "I exposed it." Silence. DeLuca cleared his throat. "Enough. We're not here to trade insults. We're here to resolve tension." The legend looked at him. "Then speak plainly." DeLuca did. "You step back. We step in. Numbers, routes, enforcement, all under shared oversight. No more unilateral decisions." Grady added, "And cooperation. Quiet cooperation." The legend sat still for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You misunderstand what happened on 125th Street." Both men watched him closely. "That wasn't a grab for power," he said. "That was a correction. And corrections don't get negotiated after the fact." Grady scoffed. "You don't dictate terms." The legend turned to him. "Then why are you sitting?" Grady flushed. "Because I'm trying to prevent a war." The legend nodded. "So am I." DeLuca leaned in. "Then choose peace." The legend's voice remained even. "Peace doesn't come from submission. It comes from clarity." He stood. "Harlem governs Harlem," he said. "You want order? Respect the line." Grady slammed his hand on the table. "Or what?" The legend looked at him, not with anger, but certainty. "Or you'll lose control completely, and you know it." The room went still. DeLuca exhaled slowly. He recognized the tone. Final, unmovable. "This is your last warning," DeLuca said quietly. The legend met his eyes. "No, this is yours." He turned and walked out. No one followed. The retaliation came fast. That night, 2 Harlem establishments were shut down, licenses pulled, assets frozen. A clear message. But Harlem did not riot. It closed ranks. Churches opened their basements. Credit flowed quietly. Men worked longer hours. Women organized food. What downtown expected to fracture instead solidified. Captain Grady watched it happen from his office, fury rising with every report. "They're not breaking," a lieutenant said. Grady slammed his fist into the desk. "Then we make them." But DeLuca had seen enough. The next morning, Falcone's name disappeared from conversations. Orders softened. Pressure eased, not because of mercy, but because of risk. This wasn't a neighborhood that could be pushed endlessly. Too many eyes, too much memory. One wrong move now would ignite something no one could contain. 3 nights later, the legend walked the same stretch of 125th Street where the shot had been fired. No marker, no flowers, just pavement. A young man approached cautiously. "They say you're done." The legend shook his head. "They say a lot of things. What happens now?" He looked down the street, lights steady, people moving, life continuing. "Now," he said, "we see who learns something." Because the confrontation hadn't ended with raised voices or drawn guns, it had ended with something far more dangerous: understanding. The city adjusted the way it always did, quietly, without apology. By the following week, Captain Grady's name stopped appearing in internal memos tied to Harlem operations. Officially, it was a routine reassignment. Unofficially, it was a demotion without the paperwork. A man who had pushed too hard in the wrong place against the wrong structure. Grady packed his office in silence. No ceremony, no handshake, just the dull understanding that authority only worked when it was backed by something stronger than ego. Downtown, the Italians recalibrated. Frank DeLuca didn't disappear, but he no longer crossed above 110th without an invitation. Falcone's former routes were quietly abandoned, redistributed elsewhere. No public apology, no acknowledgement, just absence, which, in their world, was concession. Harlem noticed immediately. Raids stopped, patrol cars rolled through instead of parking. Businesses reopened without comment. The tension that had gripped the streets loosened, not into celebration, but into something more durable: stability. The legend didn't announce victory. He resumed his routines. That was how people knew it was real. Justice in Harlem didn't wear robes or carry gavels. It arrived as balance restored. The old numbers collector returned home, walking slowly but upright. Neighbors nodded as he passed, not in gratitude, but in recognition. A man who had endured disrespect and lived to see order return. The legend visited him once more. "You didn't have to do all that," the old man said quietly. The legend placed an envelope on the table. "Yes," he replied, "I did." That was the extent of it. No speeches, no warnings. Justice wasn't something to explain. It was something to maintain. The runner who had talked never returned to Harlem. Not chased, not punished. He was simply erased from the structure. The legend understood something Captain Grady never did. Fear creates informants, but dignity creates silence. Harlem chose dignity. Weeks later, a message arrived, this one respectful, a request, a sit-down again. Different names, different tone. The legend agreed. This time, the room felt different. Chairs were pulled out, coffee was poured, voices were low. "We want clarity," one man said, "so mistakes aren't repeated." The legend nodded. "Then remember this. Harlem isn't territory. It's a community. You cross it carefully or not at all." No objections. That, too, was justice. The ripple effects spread further than anyone expected. Other neighborhoods noticed. Other captains adjusted their methods. Quiet understandings formed where confrontation had once been the default. Not because the legend ruled the city, but because he had demonstrated something rare: limits. Power respected limits. One evening, standing on a corner where Falcone's name was already fading from memory, a young man asked, "Was it worth it?" The legend considered the question. He thought of the pressure, the meetings, the risk, the shot that had echoed like a verdict. "Yes," he said finally, "because it wasn't about him." The young man frowned. Then what was it about? The legend looked around, at the open shops, the steady flow of people, the absence of fear. "About reminding everyone," he said, "that Harlem decides how Harlem lives." Justice had been served without spectacle. Power had been corrected without collapse. And the city, begrudgingly, accepted the new reality. But legends aren't measured by moments alone. They're measured by what remains when the noise fades. And this moment would echo far beyond the sidewalk where one man fell. Time did what it always did in Harlem. It moved forward, but it remembered. Months passed, seasons shifted, headlines found new scandals to chase. Falcone's name faded into trivia, mentioned only in low voices by men who needed reminding of consequences. But the moment didn't fade, it settled. The legend's name was never spoken louder after the shooting. It didn't need to be. His presence became something else entirely, less visible, more assumed. Like gravity, like a line on a map everyone agreed not to cross. Harlem didn't become quieter because fear ruled it. It became steadier because understanding did. The numbers game ran cleaner. The clubs stayed open. Violence, when it occurred, was contained quickly and decisively. Outsiders learned the rhythm or stayed out of the way. This wasn't chaos. This was governance. Downtown, Captain Grady took a desk job no one envied. He told himself the reassignment had nothing to do with Harlem. But he never spoke about the neighborhood again. Not even in private, because some losses don't come with paperwork. The Italians adapted. They always did. Harlem was no longer a place to test strength. It was a place to negotiate carefully or avoid entirely. Men like DeLuca spoke of the neighborhood with something new in their voices. Caution. Not fear, respect. In barbershops, the story evolved the way all legends do. Details sharpened, timelines compressed. The shot grew heavier with meaning. But the core never changed. 1 second, one shot, one decision that reminded the city Harlem wasn't a prize. It was a line. Old men told it as a lesson. Young men heard it as a warning. Mothers understood it as protection. The legend never corrected the story. He didn't need to. Truth had already done its work. Years later, a reporter tried to trace the moment, to pin it to a name, a face, a photograph. He failed. Because legends don't leave fingerprints, they leave outcomes. And the outcome was this. For a generation, Harlem negotiated from a place of dignity, not submission, not rebellion. Dignity. The legend aged the way strong men often do, quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. He walked the streets slower now,
Sat longer.
spoke less. But when he entered a room, conversations still paused, not because of fear, because of memory. People remembered a time when power had tried to lean too hard and discovered it could break. Late one night, years after the shot, the legend stood again on 125th Street. The city had changed. Neon signs replaced old storefronts. New faces moved with old rhythms. But the ground remembered. Every city has a moment it doesn't advertise. A moment where order asserts itself outside official channels. A moment that redraws invisible maps. This was Harlem's. Not written in law books, written in restraint. The legend understood something most never would. Violence is loud, but restraint? Restraint is what echoes, because restraint tells the world you could destroy and chose not to. Except once, when correction was required. He turned from the street and walked home. The city went on, and somewhere deep beneath the noise of progress and forgetting, the lesson remained intact. Harlem would not be humiliated quietly. Not again. Not ever. This wasn't just the story of a gunshot on 125th Street. It was the story of a line being drawn where none had existed before. For decades, Harlem had been treated like a corridor, passed through, taken from, spoken for. Power arrived with demands, authority arrived with arrogance. And the community paid the price quietly because survival required it. Until one moment made quiet impossible. 1 second, one shot, not driven by rage, not fueled by chaos, but by correction. The legend didn't pull that trigger to claim a crown. He pulled it to remind the city that respect isn't granted by title or badge or backing. It's earned by understanding boundaries. What followed wasn't a reign of fear. It was a return to balance. Because real power doesn't need to announce itself every day. It only needs to be undeniable once. Harlem learned that restraint could be stronger than intimidation. That dignity, when defended, becomes infrastructure. And that sometimes justice doesn't arrive with applause or headlines. It arrives with silence and stays. The city moved on, it always does, but it moved differently after that night. Police learned where pressure ended and chaos began. Outsiders learned that territory isn't just land, it's people, memory, and pride. And Harlem learned something about itself that no one could ever take away again. This wasn't about crime, it was about correction. It was about a community deciding it would no longer be spoken down to, negotiated over, or tested for convenience. And sometimes it takes a legend, not to rule, but to remind the world what respect really costs. Because when power forgets its limits, history doesn't whisper, it fires once, and the echo lasts forever.